Hello and greetings everyone. I really appreciate the time that you take to watch my videos. I welcome you today to the very first episode of Vikings Debunked, the show about BBC's Vikings that will inform you about the show, the historical setting, the actual Viking era and age, the Viking society, the Norse population's beliefs, and where the BBC producers basically could have done much better. In this first episode we will deal with the historical setting. This is a general topic and theme that encompasses all of the three seasons that have come out so far, and is also present in all episodes and very likely also in the future episodes. Now, the historical problem I want to discuss is the following. When is Vikings, the TV show, actually set in history? We can't tell, because it seems like the producers thought it would be a good idea to take at least 2, if not 3 centuries of actual history and press it together into one single decade, or let's say 2 decades. And that is a problem. Some of you may not understand why I think it is a problem, because hey, it happened 1,000 years ago and 3 centuries, so who cares? Let me give you one example. Imagine I'm going to make a series about the Vietnam War that is said to be set in the Vietnam War. And all I do is now take historical figures from the last 3 centuries and put them into the show. So, we have the president of the USA in the Vietnam War, who is, of course, Obama. Yeah. The bad guy in Vietnam he is fighting is Hitler. Oh yeah, that's historical accuracy right there. Now we have an US citizen called Joseph Stalin, who is heavily supporting the Vietnam War, while his good old comrade from France, Lenin, is actually opposing it. Yeah. And of course, Obama gets heavy critics from the Queen of England, Queen Victoria. And of course, because the Vietnam War is such an important international topic, we have the Japanese shoguns showing up and kicking the ass of Hitler, while Hitler is heavily supported by, let's say, Napoleon. You see where I'm getting at? If you put together various centuries, it is a huge mess. It is totally and completely questionable, and I mean, in the Vietnam War we could also be fighting Hitler's Zulu warriors. You see what I mean? It's just a mess, and that's also true for Vikings. Many people may not realize it because they don't know the history of the Vikings and don't know much about the Viking Age to begin with, but for those who know, it's really a pain and it's completely unnecessary. Why do you have to do that? You can pick a certain year, a certain century, and put all your stories and characters in there without violating anything. It's totally fine. It's okay. It's cool. It's art. I can see from an artistic viewpoint that it is important to have all the cool things that happened in the Viking Age presented in just one series. You can do that in many ways. You can have the characters age and die and let their children take over for the next stuff, which would be quite historically correct. You don't have to do one and have one and the same character doing all the awesome things that happened in the Viking Age. You could really have many generations achieving that without too many problems. Now, if you don't want to do that, I know historical novels also do that they take all the cool stuff that happened in various centuries and put them together into one story, and it's kind of art, but they also tell people, listen folks, this is entertainment, this is art. We totally made this up, it is fiction, it is what if all those people lived together in one century and in the same decade and everything else. And it's okay to do that, but you really have to tell people it's not real, it's not historically accurate. What we do is complete fiction, and enjoy it for what it is. Don't think it has any historical background, which sadly is Vikings is broadcast on History Channel. I mean, the name alone suggests that it has to do with history, and Vikings isn't really historically accurate at all. So it's very disturbing. Now, the problem I have, when is the Viking series set? In the very first episode, it looks like the Viking series takes place in around 700 AD. 700 AD is roughly the date when the Vikings stopped, well, let's say, moved away from raiding each other and raiding the Baltics, and looked more to the rest of Europe and started raiding in Germany, France and England. Now, some people may say, hey, it started much later. No, it didn't. It's the same with terrorism. Terrorism existed long before the 11th September of 2001, but in 9/11, the terrorists took down the World Trade Center, and that hurt. It hurt because it made clear that terrorist attacks can happen anywhere, anytime, and everyone is in danger. It meant that they could achieve much more than they were thought that they could achieve. It really shook people all around the globe, and that's why we say that terrorism started in 2001 and not much earlier, when terrorist attacks have been a part of human history since we have recorded history. It's similar to the Vikings. In 793 AD, they raided the monastery of Lindisfarne, and that is kind of the same as the World Trade Center thing. Lindisfarne was the third most holy place for Christians at the time. It was the holiest place right after Jerusalem and Rome, and it was stuffed with the relics of holy people, and it was thought to be so protected by God that nothing could happen there, that it was protected from all evil, and that simply no one would dare desecrate such a place. And then the Vikings come along and raid the place, take all the loot, burn the remains of the saints and whatnot, kill the monks, and that was kind of, the hell, how can God let this happen? And it was, for a lot of people at the time, the proof that the end is near. Doomsday is coming. It was the start of the prophecy of the apocalyptic writers and such. And people really believed that the world is going to end, and that the raid on Lindisfarne was the very first sign that the world ends very soon. And that's why they made such a big fuss about it, and that's why historians said that's when the Viking Age started, even though Viking raiders were around Europe much longer than that. Back to the Viking show. So it seems in the first episode it is set around 700 AD. Because Ragnar decides, let's go somewhere else. The Baltic places are just as poor as our own. We could as well raid ourselves, which basically they actually did. And so in the next episode they raid Lindisfarne, which happened about a century later. So between the first and the second episode there is a whole century. I mean, Ragnar should have died already in between this time frame. But whatsoever, he still lives and raids Lindisfarne. Okay, so far so good. So we can assume that he is from some hillbilly village full of rednecks who have no idea about the world, which is a video in itself that I will make later. But seemingly he raided Lindisfarne. Okay, fine. That is set in 793 AD. Okay, now that could be the setting of the age where the show starts. But Ragnar Lothbrok, the great character of the series, is based on a mythological figure, I have to say, because historians are pretty sure that Ragnar Lothbrok didn't actually exist, but is more a man-made figure consisting of 2 or 3 actual Vikings that really lived and achieved a lot of things, put into one guy for a cooler story. Let's say Superman, Hulk and Thor combined into one guy because it's even more awesome. Okay? So Ragnar Lothbrok may never have existed. We don't know for sure. There is very little evidence that he existed. and the sources that we can draw from are very suspicious. So let's just say that Ragnar Lothbrok did exist. Now, if he did exist, he lived around 840. That's when he achieved his stuff. In 845, he managed to sack Paris with his crew. And that's the date where he became famous. 845 AD, he sacked Paris at the age of roughly 35. That means that Ragnar Lothbrok wasn't even born when the raid on Lindisfarne happened, so he could never have done that. Quite strange, ain't it? But what's even more disturbing is his brother Rollo. Now, Rollo is seemingly based on a real historical figure, Rollo of Normandy. Now, Rollo of Normandy became Duke of Normandy after having sacked Paris, and after Rollo sacked Paris, the king of Paris of France of the time decided to give the Vikings some gold and land in order to protect him from other Vikings. So Rollo accepted and said, okay, basically I'm your mercenary, you give me land and gold, and me and my Vikings will protect you from other Vikings. That's the deal that they cut. And that's when Rollo became the Duke of Normandy. And while it seems that the Rollo from the serious Vikings is totally the same as the historical Rollo, as seemingly after season 3 Rollo is also going to become the Duke of Normandy, it has a tiny problem. First of all, the Rollo in the series looks nothing like the real Rollo. The real Rollo, we have many statues of him, and he looks very different from the guy that is shown in Vikings. Second, the real Rollo is not related to Ragnar Lothbrok, not even distantly, not at all. What's even more bothersome, they didn't even live in the same time. When Ragnar Lothbrok died, Rollo wasn't even born, which means that Rollo was born after Ragnar's death. How can they be brothers? They can't be brothers. I hope these sirens aren't too disturbing. Anyway, the thing is that Rollo really shouldn't be Ragnar's brother. Really, no, you can't do that. In special, as Rollo is the grandfather of William the Conqueror. So William the Conqueror is a direct descendant of this Rollo of Normandy, who will conquer England in 1066, which officially is the end of the Viking Age. So if they plan to put that into the series, they really managed to compromise 300 years of history into a few decades, which is kinda strange. Anyway, could they have done better? Of course, much better. I mean, let's be honest. You can make up characters. That's art as well. You can't completely make fan fiction here, look at history and say, we invent our own characters that change in history and whatsoever. It's okay, you can do that. Take Floki. Floki is one of the most popular characters of the Viking series. He is loved by many people. I myself like Floki a lot. And Floki is a cool, awesome guy who contributes a lot to the actual story and thus history. Yet Floki is a completely made up character that BBC basically pulled out of their, he is an invention made by the story writer. Floki has no historical clone or something. He is not based on any historical figure that we know of, but he is a Viking that really could have existed, that could have lived in that time frame. Floki is some guy from there, and he is great fun. Where is the problem with having the same done to Ragnar's brother? Despite that the real Ragnar, I think, had just sisters and no brother, but really, why Rollo? You could have taken any name. You could have called him Harold, Eric, or Einar, or something like that, and it would still be the same cool character. For the character of Rollo, it's not important if he is really related to the real Rollo, if he is anything like a historical figure. The character of Rollo is so far from the real Rollo that it wouldn't have have made much of a difference if they just named him Einar rather of Ragnar. Would have been much more historical accurate, would have taken nothing from the enjoyment of watching the series. It would still be the same level of entertainment, and it wouldn't be frustrating. You could also have replaced Ragnar Lothbrok with someone. Let's face it, most people don't know the history of the Middle Ages, and in special not the history of the Viking era and the Vikings. So you could have taken any name. Why Ragnar Lothbrok? Why not, Harald Haraldsson or anything else that would really allow for artistic freedom without cutting any entertainment? If you want great names, why Ragnar Lothbrok, who likely didn't even exist? Why not focus the series on guys like Eric Bloodaxe or Ivar the Boneless or Rollo of Normandy, or indeed Harold Hardrada, who also fought in 1066 for England, or better said, to conquer England, and failed, but that's another video. You could have done that perfectly without being historically inaccurate. Would have made great stories, actually. But no, they decided to mash that all together. Okay, good, they did it. What to say about it? If they do it, why the hell make it even more disturbing for those who know the history? I mean, let's take Ragnar's wives. I'm impressed that actually they did very well with Lagertha. I mean, they got her name right. That's basically it. Because Ragnar Lothbrok's first wife actually was named Lagertha. Now, she was a normal, usual Viking wife. That means she owned the household, she had a lot of money, she was of kind of noble birth, but she didn't fight. She was no fighter, she was no strong woman, and she definitely wasn't as rage-driven as she is in the series. And she has nothing in common with the real Lagertha, except for the name and the husband. I mean, this Lagertha has nothing to do with the real one. But anyway, they got the name right, yay! But they already failed at his second wife, because according to the story, Ragnar Lothbrok had 3 wives. His second wife was called Thora, and his third and final wife was called Suansloga. Yes, you heard right. None of them was called Aslaug. Now, it is said that Ragnar was intimate with a woman named Aslaug, and that this Aslaug gave birth to 2 sons of him, one of which is called Ivar, and will be very important later on because he will become Ivar the Boneless, one of the most famous Vikings in all of history. And it may be an opening to a sequel when Ragnar dies. Ivar the Boneless as his son takes over, though it more looks like they like to have his son Bjorn take over. But that's another story, because Bjorn is actually also based on a real character, and that's another thing. However, Ivar the Boneless is really a great person and guy, and can be brought into the series later on. But Aslaug was never a wife of Ragnar, she was a lover of Ragnar. What is even more disturbing is that seemingly this Aslaug in the series claims to be the daughter or granddaughter of the great Sigurd. Sigurd, a great and well-known figure of the Nibelung sagas. For those of you who don't know, the Nibelung sagas take place around 500 AD. 500 AD Nibelung sagas. And she is the daughter or granddaughter of Sigurd. That would mean that this Aslaug in the series has to be about 150 to 200 years old. That's age difference, I tell you. That could cause some problems. Also, how the hell does she give birth at 150? I mean, the hell, I didn't know that the Vikings were so advanced in genetics and medicine. That's really a huge fail, BBC. Really, that is a huge fail. It hurts, and it would have been so easy to avoid it. Name her Thora, and everything is fine. Just stick. If you go for history, just stick to the book that you're reading, and it's fine. But no, yeah, whatever. So Ragnar is married to a 200-year-old wife, unless they decide to place the whole series in the time of 500 AD, which would mess up everything because the Vikings, as we know them, didn't even exist back then, and there was this whole migration period thing going on, and yeah, a total mess. Anyway, let's say that the series starts with 793. Then we have another tiny problem, namely with Charlemagne the Great. It is stated by the king of Northumbria, I think. I'm not totally sure, I think he was it, who said, no, it was the other guy, the blonde guy, whose name just doesn't come to my mind right now. However, this king of one English kingdom basically said that he knew the Charlemagne the Great when he was still young, so like 20, 30 years ago, and that this Charlemagne the Great has already died decades ago. Okay, so far wouldn't be a problem if the series would have been set in 845. In 793, Charlemagne the Great was still alive and in charge. He was in charge for basically all his life and died in 814, which means that at the time that the series takes place, Charlemagne the Great would still be alive and well and happy and do whatever those guys do, conquering and stuff. And that is a bit of a problem, because it also means that France would look very different under Charlemagne than it did under his sons. And it would also mean that Paris would be much different as well. And that's another problem that I have. Paris is presented like in the Renaissance. Look at the clothes that they wear. That's really late medieval, not early medieval times. The fortifications are way too fucking great for that time and era, and the guys are partially wearing plate armor, which wasn't around until the late Middle Ages, like 1450 or something. They had crossbows, which weren't around in the Viking Age, and those are mistakes that could easily have been avoided by putting the guys into chainmail, just like the English guys that they actually had. And those English guys in England presented, those warriors are actually quite accurate from the clothing stuff, if you set it in the Viking Age. And they don't look too bad in it, or do they? Wouldn't have been so bad to put the same on the French guys. Anyway, would it hurt the story so much if you had been a little bit more accurate historically with characters? I mean, imagine how badass it would have been if Ragnar and Charlemagne the Great actually met, if they fought each other, which would be very likely because Charlemagne the Great was the guy that actually pursued heathens. He was the one that attacked the Saxons for being heathens. That's what made the Saxons flee to Denmark, Norway and Sweden, who escaped Charlemagne's massacre, his genocide, his crusade against the heathens. The Saxons, who are Germanic people just like the Vikings, fled to their cousins in Scandinavia, and that's what started the whole Christian and heathen conflict. It was the reason the Danes built the Dane Wall, to preserve them from the German emperor coming into their country and doing the same mass murdering as they did in Saxony. It was the reason that the Vikings started to raid Germany, because they took revenge for what Charlemagne did there. He massacred 10,000 people in a single day. He let priestesses have raped to death. He he tortured the priests to death. And all of that came to the Vikings with the survivors to spread the stories, and the Vikings were outraged by that, and that's why they started invading in Europe, because of Charlemagne the Great, partially because of Charlemagne the Great. But really, it would have been so much more awesome if they would have replaced the sissy son, king of France, that was a son of Charlemagne, with the actual Charlemagne the Great. Now that would have actually made the show better. It would have made it more entertaining, cooler, more awesome, more badass. It would have made Ragnar Lothbrok that much more badass. Okay, it would have a bit fucked up history because Charlemagne was never really beaten by the Vikings, but you know what I'm getting at. It's just, it would have been much better if they did something else there. Now I think I'm rambling a long time now and I should stop, and I guess I have said everything that is important. Just one more thing, from the architecture that is shown in the series, it also seems like it is set in the very early Middle Ages, while in other places they look like they are in the late medieval ages. So maybe Ragnar is some time of time traveler. We will see in the future. Thanks for watching, have a nice day, and see you next time, guys.